and giving us your time. Why don't we go around the table and introduce ourselves. I'm George Crandall from Crandall Arambula.
I'm Don Arambula from Crandall Arambula.
I'm Steve Schultz with the Historic Preservation Committee.
Philip Macklin, Historic Preservation Office. Doug Hacker, Preserve Historic Missoula.
Jennifer Anthony, Preserve Historic Missoula.
Janine Kaywood, Preserve Historic Missoula and the Montana Preservation Alliance.
Dan Hall with Preserve Historic Missoula.
Cynthia White, I'm with the Historic Preservation Commission.
Bill Carey, County Commissioner.
Larry Anderson, County Commissioner.
Jerry Marks from the Extension Office.
Fair Office.
Scott Meter, Fair Manager. Larry March, Missoula County. Jason Graff with Crandall Arambula.
What we've been doing in these meetings is to make a brief presentation to give you an idea about what the process is or the process we're following, and then open it up to questions, and then have go around the table and request that everyone make a comment or give us some ideas about your issues and inform us. And we have a response sheet, which Jason, I think, has handed out to you, and we would like you to identify your top issues and concerns. We'll take that information and crank it then into the planning process as we go on through. And there's a sign-up sheet which also
Did everybody get that?
goes around. And having said that, let's do this brief presentation, and we can move through it very quickly. Jason, would you like to do it this time?
Sure.
We're trying to break it up because some people have been sitting in a number of these meetings, and so Jason gets to make the presentation this time. Go ahead.
So we came here yesterday. We've been through a series of meetings, as George mentioned, with a variety of different groups, and we're glad to have you all here today. We certainly know that there's a variety of structures here that have historical significance in the community. So the agenda is basically to give you a quick summary of the process that we'll be going through. We're basically going to be working until about April or May, and there's a second phase, which I'll talk about. But we really want to get your input and your thoughts on the fair site and this 160-acre study area, which I'll be showing you in a moment. This is a context drawing, obviously, downtown to the north, and where the fairgrounds sort of fits into this larger picture of Missoula. This is a study area that's part of our task, is looking at this area within the red boundary. Of course, we have the fairgrounds, College of Technology, school sites, Splash Montana Parks. Most of you all of you are familiar with that. The project purpose here is, I'll let you take a look at that, but obviously is to make the fair financially sustainable, to expand its user base, and to retain some of the traditions that the fair has provided for your community for a long period of time. We have a response sheet which I've passed out to you, and we'd love to get your comments verbally, but also written down, so that we can have that in our back pocket and use that as we move forward in coming up with alternatives. So who we are, we're a firm from Portland, Oregon. We're a small firm. We work revitalizing American cities and also Canadian cities, but we work across the country, and we have a real passion for cities. We've worked on your downtown plan, as I see many familiar faces here today. We're just about wrapping that up. We have experience with other fairs in Salem. This is a project of our state fair. We've also worked in Lincoln, Nebraska, another state capital. And the process for this project, it's basically two phases. It's starting and designing work here in this upper portion, where we're basically gathering background information and getting our hands around the existing conditions, and also your issues and concerns regarding the fair and this larger site that we saw previously. We'll come back with a series of alternatives. Here we are today, December, that should say 2 and 3. It says 3 and 4. First phase, starting background information, meeting with you all. We'll come back and develop 3 conceptual alternatives, and that will be roughly in around April. We'll get feedback on those alternatives, and we'll develop a preferred alternative, come back and present that to the public, and also for the county consideration. We've looked at some of the prior planning that's gone on with regards here to the fairgrounds site only. This is a plan from 1989, and this informs us on ideas for the fair as they've evolved over time. We've also looked at the park's master plan of 2004, which had some suggestions for Playfair Park and improving access and circulation around that facility, linking Splash to the playground. We're also aware of the Fair Commission study in 2007. There were 3 concepts identified. This is concept 1. I think concept 3 was one of the preferred alternatives, and roughly it was an 87,000 square foot exhibition hall that was identified for the site. And you see basically a full reorganization of the fairground facility. The Central Park concept, we met with these folks just prior to this meeting. They've identified several alternatives, but basically reorganizing the fair site, creating a ball field, larger park area on the southern portion, and developing some type of College of Technology or school or public learning center on the northeast side. These were the key ideas that came out of that. The existing conditions. You're all pretty familiar with this. Residential neighborhoods surrounding the larger 160-acre site, the fairgrounds, playgrounds, and school facilities. We've taken a look at the major routes. How do you get in and out of the fair? We know that's been a large issue. Obviously, Russell and Brooks are your main conduits in the area. We've looked at traffic counts. This informs us on a couple things. You know, where are the major routes? What might be the difficulties in terms of pedestrian or other users who want to try and access the site. But basically, this gives us a sense of how do you get in and how do you get out. We've looked at existing bus routes, so other alternative transportation modes that bring people to the fair in the larger study area. Also the existing bike routes. We've looked at zoning. Parcels basically under a park zoning, but we know we also have a lot of commercial with Southgate Mall and residential surrounding that, so it informs us on how the outlying areas interact with this large green parcel. We know there's an urban renewal District 3 has been identified in the red zone. We're here, study area in the dashed red. We need to be aware of how the URD will expand and grow over time and what relationship redevelopment here has with the fair and the larger parcel, which is our study area. So we need to, I guess, move beyond this little box here and encompass those areas that surround it. The URD is going to be a tool for redevelopment in the south side of town, and how can that work with the fair. We've looked at how the fair is used throughout the year. We know we have the week of the fair, but there's also a variety of other uses. We had a tour of the site yesterday, and so we know that buildings are used for a variety of different things throughout the year. And I think the idea is to better utilize that. And now we come to the point of your issues and concerns. So I'll hand it over to George.
So, questions you might have for us before we hear from you. Any thoughts about this? Any questions? Yes.
Have you come to, you said you listed a number of things you've already looked at. Do you have any, are you drifting toward conclusions that would provide context in any of those areas, such as transportation?
Not yet.
Not yet.
We know nothing. We're a blank slate. We're waiting for you to inform us. So.
I heard you're looking at options beyond the site, the option of moving the fair out before probably some other locations. If those tend to be workable options, does that mean the focus of this whole process is going to head out to wherever the fair ends up? Or is the focus of this process on this ground and what to do with it with or without a fair?
The focus initially is on this piece of ground.
Okay.
To not assume that the fair is going to go anywhere, and to do our very best then with the site, and then only after that piece of work is finished, then say, all right, now should we look at moving the fair? Is that something we want to look at? But we think that just confuses the process at this point, so that would be a phase 2.
Why such a large boundary? Who designated the area of the study?
I think the county designated the area of the study, and it would have been our recommendation that they do that simply because that's all in public ownership. It seemed like a very logical thing to do for all that public ownership.
And there's been a bit of history of that's been generally the study area that some of the parks work, and some of the Central Park is. So it's a little bit of consistency. If anything, we think it's important to maybe even look a little bit beyond that into the urban renewal agents area, which isn't part of our official study area, but we need to do that, to think of it as more comprehensively.
There was we referred to the park study, and basically that's the study area they used as well. So it seemed to us that made some sense. You'd already decided that maybe it should be looked at as a unit.
Knowing that even short-term, there's some actions that may result College of Technology possibly moving out of there. And so we need to have some answers in the relationships of how these work together.
Yeah.
What kind of materials have you given about the history of the fairgrounds? Do you have anything
Not enough.
in hand?
Not enough. We toured the site yesterday, went into all of the buildings, and you've got some pretty remarkable buildings here, but we don't have enough.
We don't have enough. We've seen lots of photos and things like this. We know it's been an airport at one time, was at one time out on the edge of fringe of town. Now that it's through growth in the region, now it's more centrally located. So, but that's about it.
Go ahead.
Preserve Historic Missoula prepared a draft eligibility study for the National Register of Historic Places. And we took that draft document, presented it to the State Historic Preservation Office and the State Historic Preservation Office Review Board. And the recommendation was that the fairgrounds should be considered as eligible for the National Register. And there are a variety of reasons why we've come to that conclusion. But we think that it's important that the people of Missoula and Western Montana understand that we're talking about a National Register eligible property here, and that this is important, and that should be part of the process and the dialogue. And Janine's got a copy here that we'd like to give you.
We'd love to have a copy.
Planning process.
Yes.
And please remember that it is a draft. There's still work to be done on it, but
Well,
I think
that fits right in with our work. We always
So
say
we
it's a
have this for
draft.
you.
Yeah, until it's, So
have that for
we
you.
would appreciate having that copy.
And I think what Preserve Historic Missoula would like to do is go ahead and complete this draft with the building descriptions and everything that's needed to obtain a determination of eligibility from the keeper in the Washington office, from the keeper of the National Register. And not just stop at the state level, but go ahead and send it on to the keeper.
So, any other questions? We have some questions for you, and I would like to go around the table. I would like you to inform us about these buildings and which ones you think are significant at this point. And I know you're ready to do that. So.
And beyond buildings, know that you're looking at National Register, there's significant site things we need to do.
The racetrack was the first improvement built on the fairgrounds, so that's definitely on our list.
Would you like to come up to the front here?
I can come up to the front and just quickly...
We can put it right on the
magic drawing board.
board here, I think. Let's see if we
John King's magic map.
Yeah, maybe just lean it up on that road.
Can we sit it right here?
Yeah, it looks like there's
Move it. There we go. Jason, can you give us a white background? Give us because it was really showing up beautifully there for a moment.
amazing projector. Okay, that's better. I think that works.
This is just one
There we
board.
go. There we go.
This is just a board that I put together, showing some of the resources, showing at least the fairgrounds site, and then showing the proposed. This at that time was the proposed plan that the Fair Board had commissioned CTA to put together. And then this is the Sanborn Fire Insurance map. And I think it's one of the things that's pretty interesting is how much of this site in particular is intact. even though some of the buildings are gone, the actual physical site with these important open spaces, the maintenance building, clearly the commercial building, which is kind of a remarkable structure. Get on this side. And the culinary building, which is sort of a partner building, are important. What's colored in here are what's intact at this point, and I'm happy to leave this with you. These are also comments, and they're comments from the public from this last fair. I have on the back comments from the previous fair, and they really run the gamut from horse racing, the best part of the fair, to move the fairgrounds out of here, to why isn't there enough parking? And so it's a real balance, I think, in terms of what the community thinks about it. But what seems fundamentally important is the physical space, and particularly in the context of this community that is now, Missoula County's now almost 100,000 people. That's getting to be big. For Montana, it's the second largest. And in that, this entire space, and indeed the space that you're looking at, is really significant central open space. The structure is still intact. And what's important there is as much the open space that's here and the racetrack itself as it is the buildings. It's the physical space that is so interesting because there are so many different uses for it, and it remains sort of a viable physical element with multiple opportunities for different kinds of things, from rodeo to car shows. So that's in itself significant. And again, I'm going to leave it there and let other folks talk. But I think it's helpful to take a look at it in terms of its context, and it's clearly in the context of 160 acres that you're looking at. Its physical structure is really important. And whatever happens to the fair can become the framework for what goes on in terms of additional buildings that might be built, or even completely different uses, so that the structure remains there and the story remains there. Seems to be important, at least from my perspective.
We had heard, I guess we didn't hear, or maybe we read that there was a thought that the commercial building could be moved.
It wasn't our thought.
Pardon?
It wasn't our thought.
Well, we assume that didn't come from you. But we know that it apparently doesn't have a foundation, and do you know what the thinking was there?
I couldn't tell you. We weren't really part of that process.
Okay.
But I think if you look at the building, it seemed to me, from my limited experience in watching buildings get moved, it would take about 1,000 people to pick it up and literally walk it somewhere. And it would be very tricky, because if you look at the structure, it's if the side goes out, the top comes in.
Sure.
And then you really you can't put it back together again. Right.
Well, we've worked with people who move big buildings, and so I wondered whether anyone had talked to those people, and they know.
Building's much larger than this.
Yeah, I don't know that.
I think that what happened was they recognized that there was going to be a fight over that building, so by moving it, they were, quote, preserving it.
Okay.
And so that's why that was the one building that was going to be saved.
Sure. We also we toured the building, and I mean, the commercial building is a wonderful building, and noted that, of course, being the old building, it isn't fire sprinkled, and it is a public space. And we asked about that and said, "What's its deal?" And we were informed that certainly the fire department has been really wonderful about cooperating, and they station a fire truck on the site during the fair, so that if there's any fire sprinklers around, and people are informed about what to do if there's a fire. But the reason I'm asking this question, do you have any, if someone said that needs to be sprinkled at some point, what would be your thoughts about that?
Not at all, no problem.
That's no problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think there are several misconceptions I think we want to address. And I think the first one is this concept of change. And the preservation community isn't opposed to change. We're not opposed to development. What you're talking about the sprinklers and the fire and the public safety, all of these issues are important. But there are ways to address those issues in such a way that the historic fabric of the fair is kept intact. And we don't want to be coming across as opposed to anything. We just want to make sure that everyone understands what we're talking about as a historic resource, and there are ways to do these things.
Good, okay. So let's go around the table and hear from people. We'll start right here. You can pass, by the way, and then you can come back later on.
Yes, there may be other people who can state it better than I can, but basically what Dan was alluding to is we have a really well intact set, kind of a hole there, that we're concerned about from a historical perspective. We're not opposed to change, we're not opposed to refinement, to redevelopment, but we want to make sure that the preservation of the place and the story is one of the main factors that goes into the consideration of those changes. And we believe it to be fully possible to incorporate that into any changes and any future that the fair has. So that's kind of the general principle we're working on. And even if uses change, we'd like to basically kind of be able to leave our footprints in the sand. So if that building no longer is the commercial building, gets used for something else, well, that's okay, but we can leave it there and kind of memorialize the use in some way, but keep using it in a new fashion if necessary. Or use the racetrack, the footprint of the racetrack. If horse racing is gone forever, we can still use that as maybe an organizing principle for the site. Make it the Midway or a Paseo or something, so that even if it's paved over, it retains its shape. And, Grandpa can tell grandson, great, we used to sit in stands right over there, and that's where that guy fell off his horse that I told you about, and the stories are still triggered by what's left.
Good.
Yeah, I think the continuity is something that's really, really interesting, and I'm afraid part of what I have to do is explain the story. And we've walked around the downtown and talked a little bit about, it. I think the story is pretty interesting long-term in terms of Missoula's history, and it can be there no matter what happens. And I've said enough.
Okay.
When buildings are moved out of their native habitat, they invariably lose a good amount of their historical integrity. And we have numerous examples of that here in Missoula. We had a large mansion, the Greeno Mansion, near Greeno Park, which borders the north side of Interstate 90. And when that was moved, it was taken about 3 miles and was parked up at the top of a new golf course in the South Hills area, a place called Farviews. And it looked sort of like a lonesome urchin up there in this totally alien environment. And we've had a number of cases like that. We have an A.J. Gibson building, which is on Southwest Higgins, surrounded by numerous buildings that have probably gone up in the last 20 or 30 years. But this is a historical treasure, but looks totally out of place set up in this area here. You can't create history. History is, and history occurs because of a passage of time. And the people of this community have shown a reluctance to embrace new things or things that have been reworked. We used to have a very successful basketball program at the University of Montana before football kind of reared its head. And in those days it was known as the Adams Fieldhouse and drew about 9,000 people, between 85 and 109,000 per game. The university spent $13 million to totally rehab it, turn it around, change the direction by 90 degrees, facing of the court and everything. And there was a lot of resistance. People said the word that I heard more often than anything else was antiseptic. And I'm afraid that to some degree it would be inevitable that we would hear this charge be made if the fairgrounds were to be relocated. In any case, it would be new design, new materials, and a lot of the history would be lost. And I think this is something. The final point I would make is I think it's difficult to really address how you feel about the fairgrounds if the sentiments were to lean towards relocating without knowing some concrete options as to where that fairground would move to, it's really, really difficult. This is sort of like hopping, skipping, jumping across the stream without knowing what the next rock that you're going to land on is going to be. So anyway, for what it's worth.
Thank you very much.
Well, the historical aspects have already been pretty well described. I think the open space in town and the concept of Central Park is also really critical to me personally. I think, it's an opportunity that can never be reversed if that land is infilled. I mean, I was just appalled at the proposal from the 3 proposals that went before the county commission before. Just appalling. I would just hate to see anything remotely like that. So the concept of infilling with housing or anything else just is not right to me. You've got a huge open space in the middle of town, and it should be kept open.
Thank you.
I think that's important to me also, although I came to the historic preservation part of your meeting. I think the fairgrounds does function as de facto open space, and then it has this wonderful layer of historic fabric. This is actually the 3rd site for the fairgrounds in Missoula, and the very first improvement that was made to it was the construction of the racetrack. Racing has always been a part of the Missoula County Fairgrounds, wherever its location. So I think it's a critical element to retain. If we lose racing because of other issues, I agree completely with Steve's comment about using the racetrack as an organizing principle, maybe included as part of a pedestrian or vehicular transportation element. But it's very important for me that feature remain as part of the fairgrounds. Obviously, the Ole Bakke designed buildings, the agricultural pavilion, is hugely important, as is the WPA building, the maintenance building. Although it dates to a later period, it has great integrity, and it's just another story of the fairgrounds. I was here for a little bit. I came a little bit early, and I heard Jeff Badnock comment about the 2 parallel fences between the College of Technology and the fairgrounds. And I agree with him completely about trying to improve the connectivity of the spaces that you're looking at, so that you have a better flow of from one area to the next. So I think that would be great if you can work on that also. I just think that historic preservation really speaks to the soul of the city. You have wonderful craftsmanship and authenticity in the remaining historic buildings. It speaks to our cultural heritage, and it provides all of us with a sense of place, and I think that's really important to maintain.
Thank you.
I've got a couple of comments. First of all, I want to thank the county commissioners. We've been advocating for a public process on the future of the fairgrounds, and I understand that this is a pretty good chunk of change that they dropped on the table, and we appreciate that. We like having a seat at the table to be able to talk about the future of the fairgrounds. That's important to us. And I want to reiterate what I talked about earlier, that the planning process understands that this is indeed a National Register eligible property. And that there are a number of reasons why that's important, and I won't belabor the point. I've got a letter here that explains Preserve Historic Missoula's position. And we start with that, with the National Register eligible property. And we move on to the fact that when you talk about the different users and the different people, groups, and organizations that use the fair, they're all really tied together by that one theme or that one thread, and that is the history of our society and culture. And whether you're talking about horse racing or whether you're talking about historic preservation, we're all talking about the continuity of life that occurs here. And it's that underlying thread that ties everything together. And I think that's incredibly important. And our preferred alternative is that we preserve the fairgrounds where it is. We preserve the historic buildings that are here. And we find some way to achieve these goals that you've outlined, where we need to make the fairgrounds or the fair itself financially sustainable, we need to get more participation in other groups, all of these goals that you've talked about. And I think there's a way to weave historic preservation into those overarching goals.
Thank you.
My interest is really most in the way people use the fair and the scale that the old fair buildings represent is a very human scale, and the way the buildings are set up really encourage people to move about and mill about among buildings as much as they encourage people to go into buildings and do something, which is largely what an exhibition center type context would encourage people to do. And I guess I'd like to comment on some conflicts. I think the fair, I'd like to see it be able to be used much more of the year. However, I don't see a way to really do that without changing the scale that's going on there in terms of the buildings and the relation to the space, the way they're laid out. I'm sure if you get good enough folks doing it, there's a way to solve this problem, but I think it's a bear. And the other another big problem I see with the fair is that it's essentially celebrating a lot of stuff that we don't do anymore as a culture. It's agricultural. Essentially, it has been, traditionally. That's what it celebrates. That's what horse racing's all about. Barefoot kids and bareback farm horses, you know? Well, I think there's a way, if we can get more people interested in the fair, then we will find the money to do the things that we need to do. And I think that we need to bridge the gap between the traditional agricultural context and the new agricultural context in this community. And I think if we could do that and use the fair as a focal point for this, that we could tap into something that is fashionable. And I think we could include a much, much larger part of the population in our base for the fair. Let me see now. Yeah, I'm worried about the cost of renovating the buildings that are there to make them useful more of the year. And certainly sprinklers, it'd be nothing I would object to. And the heat would be nice. A little cooler atmosphere when it's 105 out there would be nice. But those things are extremely expensive. But we need to do them. If we want those buildings to be used more, we want to do them. So I'd like this, I think that making the balance of the scale changes that are going to be necessary is a big challenge. I think the cost of making the buildings more usable more of the time, and a septic might not be good, but the way they are now leaves something to be desired. And then I think we need to really work as a greater community, as a county, on the social, on the traditional agricultural question. I'm not averse to including commercial, business, and recreational, issues in there. But that's the real traditional foundation, is agriculture. And I think it would be a shame for us to forget about that as a community. It's a very important, and it continues to be an important part of our community. And in these times, who knows, it may well grow to be much more important.
Thank you.
I came here at 8 o'clock this morning to devote the morning to listening, and that's what I'm doing.
And it's all been very interesting. It really is. It's fascinating, yeah. Everyone gets a chance, yeah.
I think preserving our history is good, but I do hope we get a new fair office.
A new fair office. Okay. Is there a second for that?
I had a question, and maybe Dan can expand on this a little bit, I guess a comment. Can you explain, what was it, 6 months, a year ago, we did a thing, the historic preservation folks did a thing, and we were listed as #1 on their list of concerns.
Endangered.
What's going to happen here? Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, that's a good point. I should have brought that up earlier. Preserve Historic Missoula puts out our annual list of Western Montana's 11 most endangered historic properties, and this is #1. This is our highest priority.
Okay.
And so through all of the meetings, we've been in attendance and we have been showing up for all of these things, and that's why we're so glad to be here today. This is our highest priority.
So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for coming today and sharing their comments and stuff. And I just want to reiterate, and I think I have with most groups that have been here yesterday and through today so far and the rest of the day, this is really a transparent process. This is an open process. And, I think we're going into this, and the commissioners and the senior management staff at the county want all citizens in Missoula County to weigh in on this. So this is a great opportunity for everybody to speak. We've formed the list and stuff, but definitely if you're not on that list, we want to encourage people to still give their input on what they want to see happen with their fairgrounds. So thank you for coming.
I just want to make one comment about how we kind of came up with this process a little bit. And there's two aspects to in looking in at other planning processes that I think come as afterthoughts, and we didn't want to do that. We wanted to make sure they're up front. And one is historic preservation. We want to make sure you guys are at the table at the beginning of this process rather than an afterthought, because it's important to everyone in the county, I think. And the other one, and we've engaged them as well, is the disabled community and making sure that access and usability of any new facility, and that's going to be one of our top priorities as well. So, and we're trying to get those two items up front and in this process, so I just wanted to make sure to emphasize that.
Jason, anything?
I think I'll pass.
I have some questions.
So do I.
Okay. Jason, can you connect us up with the aerial photograph for a moment? We would... Just, let's talk about some of these buildings. For instance, the shop building or the
maintenance building.
Maintenance building.
The WPA building. Yeah. We looked at that. It's pretty...
We didn't go into it.
We didn't go into it, but
That's
we
when
looked on the edges of it.
Yeah. And so...
We didn't even realize it was a WPA building.
No, it didn't.
So we didn't know that.
Fascinating. So the buildings that we have, well, you've named some here. You've got the maintenance building, right? The commercial building.
The culinary building?
Is it the culinary?
Yep.
Yes.
And what else?
The one that they currently call the commercial building was actually built as the agricultural pavilion.
Okay.
And Ole Baki was a very prominent Missoula architect. He designed that as well as the original grandstands, which unfortunately burned. So in what I still call the agricultural pavilion, and what's the name of the other one?
Culinary.
Culinary arts buildings, those are probably Baki designs.
Okay.
The WPA building may also have come from that same office. We haven't quite tracked that down, but it's much later. It was constructed obviously much later, in the 1930s.
And then the track.
The
track itself, which goes back to the beginning. Other
1913, I believe.
Okay. Other signature pieces.
Pieces here.
What's that?
Are there other signature pieces?
There are.
In terms of the built environment,
Yes.
no, I think those are the principal ones.
Okay.
But contributing buildings, we know that there's like an army barracks here that has been moved in.
There are some buildings that were moved, they're old CCC buildings that were moved in from Fort Missoula, and I believe that's where the office is. There have been this concrete block building dates to the 60s or early 70s, I believe. And there are a variety of other small buildings tucked in and around the complex.
And I guess
And then-
how significant are those in your, I mean, obviously they're part of your application of contributing buildings, but some of them are, look like they're in pretty tough shape right now, and would it, I guess there's a line in the sand somewhere on here if those were thought.
I don't think that those would probably be defined as non-contributing resources in the nomination. So I don't think that we're particularly concerned about those. We're still talking about what the end of the period of significance should be. All of these little arcane details of National Register listing, but if we extended it through the 1950s, it might be the case that the fair office would be a contributing building. But we still haven't really resolved that issue yet.
How about any other open spaces other than the track? I mean, because up in the top where they run the carnival and that space up there.
What's interesting, from the standpoint of cultural landscapes, the open space, the spatial organization of the site retains a fairly high level of integrity. So the juxtaposition of open space to buildings, to built environment, that, especially on the north end there, you see north of the buildings, that area has always been left open and used for things like carnivals. And carnivals have been a part of the Western Montana Fair also since its, virtually since its beginnings. It's used for open space exhibits. I guess I would like to say that my perception of the fairgrounds is not that it has always been focused on agriculture. The business community has always traditionally been asked to bring in displays. Has always been a commercial building as well as an agricultural building. So I think that there has been really the focus of the Western Montana Fair is really more multifaceted than simply agriculture as an exhibit for agricultural produce and activities. So I guess I might disagree with Cynthia a little bit about that. That's why we have so many different kinds of buildings to display different types of things.
What is your thinking about new buildings that go in and compatibility?
I think if you use the architectural, if you use the historic buildings as inspiration for the construction of new buildings, that would be great. And if you added new buildings in places where old buildings could be torn down and not expand the footprint of the built environment, that would be great too. I mean, you could get rid of a lot of little trashy buildings and replace them with a nice one of a compatible historical design, or a design that's historically compatible.
For example, there may be, there is a need for another rink, apparently, skating rink, or could be at some point in time. And then the issue is, all of a sudden, the skating rink is taking a bigger piece, skating is taking a bigger piece of the site, and is there a character issue here that the visual impact of these new facilities starts eroding the historic character of the site? Is that a concern of yours?
It is a concern of mine personally. I think that there is a positive side to the existing skating rinks, is that they're all on the very edge. They're not slap dab in the middle of the historic complex. So if you have to expand, continue expanding on that edge, go north, put your new skating rink there, and also think about the design, because those are very definitely not compatible historically with the character of the historic buildings.
Okay.
The racetrack is obviously the infield of the racetrack is obviously a vastly underused area. And I'm wondering what you folks might think about constructing a tunnel underneath the track and either making it available for low-rise structures or parking, which obviously, as on Philip's board, a lot of people complain about the lack of parking, which is a reality. But when you look at this map, that's a big area of ground there that should be used for something worthwhile.
Okay.
Any thoughts about the grandstand there? We've looked at it, and there've been some alterations to make it safer, and it's obviously not historic anymore. But keeping that grandstand in itself.
Well, it suffered from a fire too, which took down a good share of it. You would hope that if horse racing ever is given a new breath of life, that maybe there might be reason for additional seating there, but I don't have any thoughts as to what that would mean in the way of expansion or renovation, but that could be a possibility.
Tell us more about the relationship between the rodeo and rodeo and the track itself, because what you end up doing is taking out a piece of the track, and then how do you replace it, or do you replace it, or what's your thinking? Because the grandstand becomes the organizer, of course.
Right. Currently, this portion of the infield, from right here where we cross the track, coming to the backside, is used to support rodeo equipment, rodeo participants, horse traders, and that. The last few years, we've done concerts in this area, on the lawn area. This is where they referred last night to the football field, playing football. That was where the field was in this area. So we're trying to expand and do more things out in this lawn area now that we are not racing horses, and that can be accessed from the front side right through here across the racetrack.
Okay. So if the rodeo were to remain as a main attraction, of course that conflicts with the racetrack.
But there have been many years when we had rodeos and racing, so they're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah.
They're
And
kind
so-
of temporary.
Right. So how have you handled the transition then?
So what we do is basically we close the track in the morning. So say we were racing horses. Track would be closed from 5 a.m. till 11 a.m. There would be about an hour to an hour and a half window to get logistics in. If you're going to move livestock in, semis, buses, anything to do. And then we close the track at 12:30. Nobody crosses the track. Work the track up again, and that's closed until 15 minutes after the last race. So it could be 5:30 or 6 o'clock. So you do have a little bit of a time window to move stuff in.
So it's moving stuff in and out, and then doing a little bit of earthwork and grading to get it to where it needs to go?
Yeah, actually, once we start on the track and get it ready to go for the race meet, we just kind of incorporate the arena into that. So it kind of all runs together. It's just the logistics of getting people back and forth.
Okay, so no problem accommodating both then?
No, just takes a little bit more coordination.
Yeah, okay.
But it can happen. It's not. Okay.
And we've done it successfully for many, many years, so.
So we're kind of fishing around here, but assuming everyone agreed that the racing of horses was something that probably wouldn't occur on the site, but that the track itself should remain, or the form of the track. Is there a problem there? Then, as far as you would keep the track in its original form, it might be no longer a dirt surface, it might be another kind of surface, or let's put it this way, the shadow of it would be there. And then the question is, what is that shadow? Let's assume that horse racing goes away, but you want to keep the shadow of the track somehow. Any thoughts about that?
Well, I guess my first question would be, if you did that, what purpose would it serve?
We don't know.
We don't know, but you are saying that the track is certainly very much a part of the history, was one of the first physical manifestations of the fair, and that it ought to remain. So, yeah.
I was just going to say, it's really all part of the story, and so if the story remains and it becomes an organizing principle for circulation, then it's there. It's a hard surface, as Steve said, it could be a promenade. If you look in the middle left-hand side of that image, you'll see something very unique. See those curved shapes? On the left-hand side of the image,
curved streets.
There's some curved streets right there. Yeah. That was an outdoor theater.
That was a drive-in.
That was a drive-in. And that's the shape of the drive-in. That's the story. And there's the image. So it became the organizing principle for the housing that went in. So there was a drive-in there in the 50s and into the 60s, and then the drive-in went away, or 70s. And then the story's still there in the image. And we have those kinds of things all over town. And we have car barns for a trolley system that we no longer have. And an area called the Car Line Addition. That was the car barns, and the car line ended there, or at least that's where they were stopped. So I mean, there's a lot of stories that are embedded in this place, and this simply could become another one of those.
Okay.
But uses would change, structures would change as they have, and others would be adapted to new uses.
Okay.
I might add one thing.
Yeah.
The Montana Preservation Alliance also offered to help come and analyze some of the buildings if there is some thought to adapt them to new uses. There's some architectural help from the Preservation Alliance to look at that.
Okay.
Also,
Good, thank you.
if you want it.
Other comments and thoughts before we, yeah.
Now, we just to harp on the racetrack, we looked loosely, and this was quite a while ago, at either new development or incorporating new development into the fairgrounds and still using the racetrack. And we were also looking at year-round development, so more year-round public use. And kind of the two long, kind of straight stretches of the racetrack became kind of obvious access into and out of the site. So where the home stretch stretches out for the sprints to the upper right, that connects basically right up to the College of Technology. And then if you do basically the same thing on the bottom left, what you've got are two wonderful ways of getting into the site, hopefully not really creating a new thoroughfare through the site for just plain through traffic, but easy access to get people in who want to use it year-round for other uses as well. So it became great for traffic.
Good comments, thank you very much. Any other comments before we break up? I want to thank you all for giving us your time and your thinking. It's very, very helpful, and we look forward to seeing you next time. And we need to pick up the written material. Thank you again, really appreciate it.